If she closed her eyes, something else would open. The old ones in the village of Kambali said those words in whispers, the way people speak of storms that have not yet formed but already taste like rain. No one remembered when Adana had last slept. Not the children who now chased goats between clay huts. Not the hunters whose beards had grown white like ash. Not even the elders who claimed to remember the year the river turned black for 7 days. Adana was always awake. At dawn, when the sky stretched pink over the savannah and the air smelled of dust and distant cattle, she was already seated outside her hut, grinding millet with slow, steady hands. At noon, beneath the burning sun, her shadow never slumped. At night, when even the restless dogs curled into silence, she remained upright, eyes open, watching. The villagers said she was strange. Some said cursed. Others believed she had offended the spirits and been denied the mercy of sleep. But no one could deny one thing. Whenever she tried to rest, something terrible happened. The first time was years ago. Adana had been younger then, though still older than most of the unmarried women. She had worked through harvest season without pause. When the moon grew thin and pale like a fingernail clipping, she told her neighbor, "Tonight I will sleep. Even stones must rest." That night, just as her breathing deepened for the first time in months, a fire leapt from nowhere. It began in the granary. Flames rose like angry ancestors, devouring millet, maize, and dried cassava. The villagers woke to screams and smoke. By the time the fire died, half the season's food had turned to ash. Adana had awakened coughing, not from smoke, but from a dream she could not remember. After that, she stopped trying. Years passed. Whenever her eyelids dropped, something followed. A sickness that made children burn with fever, a hyena pack that grew bold and dragged livestock into the dark, a sudden storm that flattened roofs like crushed calabashes. It became a pattern too sharp to ignore. If the watchman sleeps, thieves rejoice, the elder Nwoke once muttered, leaning on his carved staff. But Adana was no watchman. She was a weaver, a quiet woman with narrow shoulders and eyes that seemed older than earth. Still, she remained awake. At first, people pitied her. They brought herbs, bitter roots, teas from traveling healers. "Drink," they urged. "Let your body rest." She tried once. That night, 3 children wandered from their homes as if sleepwalking, though their eyes were open. They walked toward the forest's edge, toward a darkness that did not belong to the trees. Adana found them just before their small feet crossed the line where moonlight ended. She did not speak of what she saw beyond that line. After that, the pity stopped. Fear replaced it. Children were warned not to stare into her eyes too long. Some swore they never blinked. Others claimed her shadow moved before she did. "She stands between us and something," whispered the potter's wife. "I do not know what, but I know it watches back." Adana heard the whispers. She never answered them. Instead, she watched. She watched the sun rise and fall. She watched the smoke curl from cooking fires. She watched the forest at night. Especially the forest, because that was where the wind sometimes breathed wrong. It happened during the Harmattan season, when dry air carried sand like invisible teeth. Adana sat outside her hut, as always, while the rest of Kambali slept. The moon was swollen and heavy. The world was silver and still. Then the wind stopped. Not faded, stopped. Even insects froze mid-song. Adana's fingers tightened around the wooden stool beneath her. From the forest came a sound. Not a roar, not a growl, a sigh. Long, patient, waiting. Her chest tightened, but her eyes did not close. In that silence, she felt it, the pressure, as though something pressed its face against an unseen barrier. Testing. Her vision blurred for a moment. Exhaustion clawed at her mind. Just one blink, her body begged. Just one. The sigh grew louder. Behind her, a baby stirred in its hut. Adana inhaled sharply and stood. The pressure eased. The wind returned. Crickets resumed their song, but sweat rolled down her spine like cold rain. In the morning, she walked to the elder's compound. Nwoke sat beneath a baobab tree, eyes half closed in age. "You are thinning," he observed. "I am tired," she replied simply. "Tired people sleep. I cannot." He studied her. "Or you will not." She met his gaze, and something passed between them, recognition, dread. "You remember the prophecy," she said softly. Woke's fingers tightened on his staff. "An infant born during the red eclipse will stand at the edge of night. If she falters, darkness will cross." The red eclipse had happened the night Adana was born. The elders had slaughtered a goat and buried its bones at the forest line. But bones rot, promises weaken, and time forgets. "Perhaps it was only a story," Nwoke said, though his voice carried no conviction. Adana turned her face toward the forest beyond the village huts. Last night's sigh still echoed in her mind. "If I close my eyes," she whispered, "it leans closer." Nwoke said nothing. That evening, children played near the river. Women pounded grain. Men prepared for a hunt. Life continued. But beneath it all lay tension, like the drumbeat before a dance begins. Adana sat in her usual place as night fell. Her body trembled now. Even standing required effort. Stars burned above like distant fires. The moon rose again, and the forest waited. Somewhere inside her bones, she knew something was growing impatient, and she did not know how much longer she could remain awake. The night after Adana spoke to Elder Nwoke, the drums did not sound in Kambali. No one ordered silence. It simply happened. The drummer, a broad-shouldered man named Obi, lifted his hands at sunset, then lowered them again without striking the skin. He would later say he felt as though something was listening too closely. And in the forest, something was. Adana felt it before the moon rose. The air had weight, not heat, weight, like invisible water pressing against her lungs. Even the goats shifted uneasily in their pens, stamping hooves against hard earth. She had begun counting her heartbeats to stay alert. 100, 200, 300. At 500, her vision blurred. At 600, she heard it again. That sigh. But this time, it did not come from one direction. It came from everywhere. Her head snapped toward the baobab tree. Nothing. Toward the river path. Nothing. Toward the forest edge. The darkness there was thicker than before. Not shadow, thickness, like smoke that refused to rise. Her eyelids dipped for the briefest second. A scream tore through the night. Adana surged to her feet. It came from the western huts. She ran, faster than her tired legs should allow, and found a crowd gathering outside Mama Sade's home. Inside, a child thrashed on a woven mat, eyes wide open. But he was not awake. He was speaking, in a voice too deep for his small body. "They are counting," the child growled. "They are counting the blinks." Women gasped. Someone began chanting protective words. Adana pushed through the circle and knelt beside the child. She placed a trembling hand on her forehead. His skin was cold, too cold. "Who is counting?" she asked quietly. The boy's pupils rolled upward until only white showed. "The ones who wait beyond the lid of the world." The hut darkened. Not slowly, instantly, as if a giant hand had covered the moon. Gasps filled the room. Adana felt it then, the pressure slamming against her mind. Her vision tunneled. Her body begged, "Sleep. Just close your eyes." The child's mouth stretched into a grin that split his face unnaturally wide. "Blink," the voice whispered through him. The word echoed, not in the hut but in her skull. Blink, blink, blink. Her knees buckled. The darkness pressed harder like claws scraping against invisible glass. Then she bit her own tongue. Pain shot through her mouth. Blood filled it. Her eyes snapped fully open. The hut brightened instantly. The child collapsed into ordinary sleep. Outside, dogs howled in confusion. The villagers stared at Adana as though seeing her for the first time. Not strange, not cursed, but holding something back. She stood slowly, blood on her lips. She said hoarsely, "They are testing." "Who?" Mama Sade whispered. Adana did not answer. because she did not fully know, but she remembered the stories her grandmother once told before fear made the elders silent. There are spirits of earth, spirits of water, spirits of ancestors, and then there are the night ones, older than fire, older than language. They do not walk in daylight because daylight is a door they cannot open, unless someone closes the only eye watching it. The next days brought no rest. Children reported shadows standing beside their beds. Hunters returned claiming the forest seemed larger inside than outside. One swore he saw trees bending toward him as if trying to listen. Adana had begun shaking even while standing. Dark rings deepened beneath her unblinking eyes. Elder Walker came to her again. "You cannot continue," he said quietly. "If I do not, you will not continue." His face hardened. "Then we must find another way." "There is none." "There must be." Adana studied him carefully. "There is always a price," she said. He did not ask what she meant. That evening, the village gathered. Torches burned bright, though no wind threatened them. Fear had spread like invisible smoke. "Tell us what you know," Obi demanded. Adana stood before them, swaying slightly. "When I was born," she began, "the moon bled red. The elders said a veil thinned that night. They buried bones at the forest line to seal it." She turned toward the darkness beyond the huts, but bones weaken. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "What wants to cross?" someone shouted. She answered with difficulty. "Not bodies, not beasts." Silence fell heavy. "They want permission." Confusion spread. "What permission?" She closed her eyes for half a heartbeat. The torches flickered violently. Gasps! Her eyes snapped open again. To be seen without resistance. A long, shaking silence followed. Then Mama Sade whispered, "You are the resistance." Adana did not deny it. That night, something new happened. Near midnight, a thin line appeared at the forest edge. Not light, a crack, as though the air itself had split. From within it seeped a faint silver glow. Children began crying inside their huts simultaneously. Dogs whimpered and hid. Adana felt her knees give way. She had not slept in years. Her body had limits. The crack widened. From within it came shapes, not fully formed, but stretching, testing, like fingers pushing against thin fabric. She staggered forward, every step agony. If she closed her eyes, the elder whispered behind her, something else would open. Adana finished. The shapes pressed harder. Her vision fractured into black spots. She felt herself tipping toward unconsciousness. And in that fragile moment, the crack widened further. A face began to emerge. Not human, not animal. A smooth, pale surface where eyes should be, waiting to be given sight. "Blink," it whispered. The entire village heard it. Several people clamped hands over their eyes in terror. Adana swayed violently. Her body was failing, her will thinning, and for the first time since childhood, she wanted to sleep. The crack did not close at dawn. That was the first sign that something had changed. Normally, whatever pressed from the other side retreated when sunlight spread across Kambali like warm oil. The forest would resume its ordinary shape. Birds would sing. Leaves would rustle with believable wind. But this time, the crack remained. It thinned as the sun rose, fading to something almost invisible, yet it pulsed faintly, like a scar that refused to heal. Adana stood before it long after the others had retreated to their huts. Her legs trembled violently now. She leaned against a termite mound to keep from collapsing. Behind her, the villagers argued. "We must leave this place. Abandon our ancestors? It is her curse that binds it here. It is her that holds it back." Voices rose. Fear sharpened them into blades. Adana did not turn. Her eyes were fixed on the faint seam in the air. She understood something now that she had not allowed herself to admit before. It was not just her wakefulness keeping the night spirits away. It was her awareness, her watching. The moment she stopped witnessing the world, even for a breath, something else claimed the right to witness in her place. And what watched from beyond did not see as humans do. That evening, Elder Nuoke came again, walking slower than before. "You are dying," he said quietly. "Yes." The simplicity of her answer unsettled him. "You speak of it like rain. It is coming." He studied the faint crack ahead of them. "Tell me what must be done." Adana's lips trembled. "I do not know fully," she admitted, "but I think I was wrong." "About what?" "I believed I alone stood between them and us." She swallowed. "But they are not pushing against me." The crack pulsed faintly, as if in agreement. "They are pushing against something older." Nuoke's brows knit together. "The seal?" "Yes." "The bones we buried?" She nodded slowly. "They were never meant to last forever. They were meant to hold until the next watcher rose." Silence. Nuoke's gaze shifted toward the village, toward children playing uneasily near their mothers, toward men pretending courage, toward young women whispering fear. "Another like you?" he asked. Adana's breath hitched. "Not like me." "Then what?" "Willing." The word fell heavy. That night, the crack widened further. Not violently, patiently. The pale face began emerging again, smoother now, more defined. Where eyes should have been, there were hollows, empty and expectant. The voice returned, no longer whispering, but layered, as though many mouths spoke through one throat. "We grow tired of asking." The ground beneath the villagers' feet vibrated faintly. Several huts creaked. A child pointed toward the sky. The moon had dimmed, not hidden by cloud, dimmed as though something fed on its light. Adana staggered forward. Her knees buckled completely this time. She collapsed to the earth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The pale face pushed further through the seam. The hollows where eyes should be widened. "Blink," it commanded. Adana's vision blurred beyond repair. Darkness licked at the edges. She had not slept in years. Her body no longer obeyed her. For the first time, her eyes closed. The crack tore open. A scream rose from the forest, not animal, not human, but layered and ecstatic. The pale face surged forward fully into the world. The air froze. Shadows elongated unnaturally. Several villagers dropped to their knees. The night spirit stood half-born, half-formless, its smooth face tilting toward the huts. And then, a small voice spoke. "Stop!" It was Amara, Mama Sade's daughter, the child who had once been taken in her sleepwalking trance. She stepped forward, trembling but resolute. Her eyes were wide, fully open. "I will watch," she said. The night spirit paused. The hollows in its face shifted toward her. Adana lay unconscious on the ground. The villagers stared in horror. "Child, no!" Mama Sade screamed, but Amara did not move. She walked to where Adana lay and knelt beside her. "You told me once," the girl whispered, "that fear only wins when no one looks at it." Adana's eyelids fluttered faintly, though she remained trapped in exhausted darkness. Amara lifted her small face toward the night spirit. "I am looking." The air vibrated violently. The spirit recoiled slightly, as though struck. The crack stopped widening. The pale form flickered. Villagers gasped in disbelief. Amara did not blink. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her gaze remained locked. The spirit's voice fractured. "You are not chosen." "No," she whispered. "I am chosen." The words carried weight beyond her size. The crack shuddered. Light from the moon flickered brighter. The spirit shrieked, a sound like dry leaves torn in a storm. Slowly, painfully, the seam in the air began to narrow. The pale face distorted, stretching thin. Its hollows where eyes should be twitched with furious hunger. Another will fall, it hissed. Another will weaken. Amara swayed but did not blink. Then another will watch. The crack sealed shut with a sound like a breath finally released. The village returned to ordinary darkness. The moon burned steady once more, and Adana exhaled deeply, for the first time in years, into real sleep. The villagers stood frozen. Amara collapsed moments later, unconscious but breathing. Mama Sade ran to her. Elder Nwoke dropped to his knees beside Adana. "She sleeps," he murmured. "She sleeps." The wind moved gently again. Crickets resumed their rhythm. But something fundamental had shifted. The burden was no longer singular. The barrier was not one woman. It was a choice, and choices, unlike prophecies, could spread. Yet, even as relief flooded Kambali, Elder Nwoke's heart remained uneasy, because the spirit had not said it was defeated, only delayed, and it had promised something. Another will fall, another will weaken. The night had been pushed back, but it had not forgotten the way. Adana slept for 3 days, 3 full rotations of sun and moon. The village moved in hushed reverence, as though afraid their footsteps might shatter something sacred. Women left bowls of broth outside her hut. Children were warned not to shout near her door. Even the goats seemed to bleat more softly. And yet, no disaster came. No fire, no sickness, no crack in the air. Hope, fragile and trembling, began to bloom. Perhaps it had been broken. Perhaps the child's courage had ended it. Perhaps the night spirit had retreated forever. But hope is a seed that grows too quickly in frightened soil. On the 4th night, Amara woke screaming, not with fear, with clarity. Mama Sadem rushed to her mat. The girl sat upright, eyes wide open, not wild this time, but aware in a way that made her mother's breath catch. "They are counting again," Amara said softly. Outside, the wind had stopped. Mama Sade felt it then, the wrongness in the air. Across the village, dogs began to whimper. Adana stirred in her hut for the first time since collapsing. Her body felt heavy, like stone soaked in rain. For the first time in years, she had dreamed. And in that dream, she had walked beyond the forest, not through trees, through a veil. On the other side, she saw them clearly. The night spirits were not beasts, not demons in the shape of monsters. They were absents, hollow forms made of stretched shadow, with smooth faces waiting to be given sight. They did not destroy for hunger or cruelty. They expanded, like darkness filling a room when a lamp dies. She had understood then what the elders had misunderstood. The prophecy had never meant she alone would stand forever. It meant someone must always stand. She opened her eyes to a scream, not from outside, from within her own chest. The crack had returned, stronger. She stumbled from her hut, legs weak but moving. The seam in the air tore open wider than ever before. No longer a thin line, but a jagged wound stretching from earth to treetop. From it poured silver-black mist. The villagers gathered, panic rising. The pale face emerged again, clearer now, almost solid. And behind it, hundreds more, not pushing, waiting. "You rest," the first spirit said, its voice calm as dry wind. The door opens. Adana stepped forward. "I am awake. For now." Its smooth head tilted. "You are flesh. Flesh fails." The mist began spreading across the ground, creeping like spilled ink. Children cried. Men raised spears, useless gestures against something that had no body to pierce. Amara stepped beside Adana. Her small hand slipped into the older woman's trembling one. "I can help," she whispered. Adana yipped down at her. "You are a child. I am watching." The spirit's hollow face turned toward Amara. 2 lamps burn, but both will dim. The crack widened further. A cold, unlike winter, swept across the village. Adana understood then what must happen. It was not enough to resist. They had been standing at the door, but the door itself remained thin. The bones buried long ago had rotted. The seal had weakened because it depended on mortal endurance. There had to be something stronger, something not made of flesh. She turned to Elder Nwoke. "The tree," she said. His eyes widened. "The baobab? It stood before this village, before my birth, before the prophecy." The spirit's mist swelled, agitated. "The tree remembers," Adana continued. "It has watched longer than I have." Understanding dawned slowly across the elder's face, to bind the veil to something living, but not mortal. The spirit hissed sharply. "You cannot." Adana squeezed Amara's hand once. "Go back," she told the girl gently. Amara's eyes filled with tears. "No." Before the child could protest further, Adana stepped away and walked toward the great baobab tree at the village center. Its trunk was thick enough to house secrets. Its bark bore scars from generations of carvings. She placed both palms against it. "Ancestors who watched before me," she whispered, "lend me your endurance." The crack behind her roared. The pale spirit surged forward violently. Mist lashed like wind without air. Villagers screamed. Adama closed her eyes, but not in sleep, in surrender. She let her awareness sink downward, into roots, into soil, into memory. She felt the tree's slow pulse, not heartbeats, centuries. She felt seasons passing like breaths. She felt drought and rain, war and birth, all witnessed without blinking. "Share it," she pleaded. The spirit struck. The mist engulfed her body, but instead of collapsing, she felt herself expand, not upward, outward. Her consciousness stretched into bark and branch. The baobab shuddered violently. Light burst from its trunk. Not fire, not lightning, but something older. The crack in the air shrieked. The pale face twisted in fury. "No vessel holds forever," it screamed. Adana's voice answered, but now it echoed through wood and leaf. "Then let the earth hold."
The tree's roots surged deeper into the ground. The seam began sealing, not thinly, but thickening like woven cloth. The mist recoiled violently. The waiting shapes behind the first spirit flickered uncertainly. "You choose imprisonment," the spirit snarled. "I choose watchfulness," she replied. With one final cry, the crack sealed entirely. The mist evaporated. The pale face shattered into nothing. Silence fell. The baobab stood still. Adana's body lay at its base, unmoving. Amara ran forward, sobbing, but Elder Nwoke knelt beside the body and touched her neck. No pulse. Yet the tree's leaves rustled, though no wind blew. A low hum vibrated through its trunk. Amara pressed her ear against the bark, and she heard it. Not silence, breathing, slow, steady, watching. The villagers stepped back in awe. Adana had not died. She had changed her place at the door. The village of Kambali did not mourn Adana as they mourned the dead. They listened. For days after her body was buried at the roots of the baobab, no one slept easily. Mothers lay awake beside their children. Hunters kept their fires burning until dawn. Even the elders resisted closing their eyes, afraid the crack might reopen the moment darkness thickened. But it did not. The nights returned to their natural rhythm. Crickets sang, wind moved honestly through grass. The moon shone without dimming, and the baobab watched. Its leaves no longer rustled randomly. They moved with intention, especially when the forest grew too quiet. Sometimes, in the deepest hours of night, the bark seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing in and out. Amara visited it every evening. She would sit with her back against its massive trunk and whisper stories of the day. "The goats broke the fence again," she would say softly. "Mama burned the stew. Obi finally played the drums tonight." And sometimes, when her voice trembled, she would ask, "Are you still there?" The leaves would stir in reply. Not loud, not dramatic, but enough. Years passed. Amara grew taller, stronger. Her eyes carried the same depth Adana's once had, but without the constant exhaustion. The villagers changed too. They no longer feared the woman who never slept. They honored the one who chose to become something greater than sleep. Children were taught a new proverb. The eye that guards the village must never belong to one body alone. For Adana had shown them a truth deeper than prophecy. The night spirits were not defeated. They were patient. They waited for moments of neglect, of blindness, of indifference. But now the barrier was not flesh that could falter. It was memory. It was vigilance. It was shared responsibility. And on certain nights, when the moon hung low and the forest sighed faintly, the villagers would feel a ripple of unease. They would lift their heads, they would look toward the baobab, and they would remain awake, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Because if she had closed her eyes, something else would have opened. Instead, she chose to become the watcher within the wood, the breath within the bark, the presence that never blinked. And as long as someone in Kambali remembered to look into the darkness without surrendering to it, the door would remain closed. The night spirit would remain waiting, and the village would survive.